Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Food Literacy for All. Thank you for being here. Thank you to our DJ Cite. We used to call him tech support. Now we call him DJ Cite. And I just want everyone to know that the music each week is the choice of our guest speakers. So thank you, Marcus and Angela, for that opening tune. I'm always in such a good mood at the beginning of this class. So let's just, I know every class, some people are here for the very first time. So thank you to all of our generous supporters from across campus at the University of Michigan. This class, as you know, is co-led by myself with Dr. Margot Finn and my colleague Winona Bynum at the Detroit Food Policy Council. The three of us have been dreaming about this class since we met on Detroit rooftops, planning it in the summertime. Food Literacy for All is free. It's open to the public. Anyone from around the world is welcome to join us. All the classes are recorded and available on the SFSI website. You can find a link to the previous sessions in the chat box. There's a few different ways to engage. I know each class, some of you like to use the Miro board. So you can, if you hear a quote from a speaker that you really like, or you hear something you want to talk more about, you want to unpack it, you're curious about it, you can put that in the discussion section. We also are going to have some poll questions throughout class. Students are, of course, required to answer them for participation credit. You can also use the hashtag Food Literacy for All if you like to engage with folks on Twitter. And for questions, sometimes the chat box gets busy, so please direct your actual questions for the speakers to that Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And if you are willing to talk to a student in this class for 15 minutes about your food systems experience, involvement, there's a link in the chat to just a really simple Google form, and students in the only one student in the class will make sure that that is the case, would contact you just for a quick conversation. So thank you. Whatever you do related to food and the food system, it would be appropriate. So we would love for you to join that. Thank you. Okay, so here's the first poll, just to get us in the mood for today's talk. Which of the following describes you? So A, I grow my own tomatoes. B, I grow my own greens. Greens, we're talking anything from lettuces to kale to collards to arugula to spinach, anything in that category. C, I have no experience at all with working on a farm or a garden. You don't know your way around that. Or D, you're happy to let others do the growing and you'll do the eating. And E, you might not, maybe you haven't done it before, but you would like to learn how to grow your own food. So I'm seeing the responses come in. It looks like a lot of E's. That's the majority. Over half of you want to learn how to grow your own food. I'm seeing about 30% of you grow your own tomatoes and greens. 20% of you have no experience working on a farm or garden. And then there's about 61 of you, 28%, who are just happy to let other people do the growing and you will do the eating. So Angela, you might have something to say about that later. I'm curious to see your response, and we'll just let this go. Like all the polls, we just want to make sure that folks respond, and then you can see the answers. So I will pass it's over to Dr. Margot Finn to introduce our speakers.
Hi, thanks, Lily. I'm seeing some fun answers to what people like growing most. Herbs, flowers, and succulents in an apartment, root vegetables. So thanks for those answers. It is my pleasure to introduce the speakers that we have today. So I'll introduce them in the order that I think they're going to start us off, but then we hope to really have a conversation both between them and with some of you tonight. So do go ahead and start dropping questions in the Q&A as you think of them. For Dr. Marcus A. Coleman, who has extensive experience as both an educator and in outreach at land-grant universities. He's currently visiting assistant professor in the School of Liberal Arts at Tulane University with a joint appointment in economics and strategy, leadership and analytics. And he has previously served as program director for the Grow Louisiana Beginning Farmer Training Program at the School of Plant, Environmental and Soil Sciences at the Louisiana State University Agricultural Center. He's active in multiple initiatives seeking to provide sustainable and equitable opportunities in agriculture and the food system, including serving as a member of the Racial Equity in the Food System Working Group led by the MSU Regional Center for Regional Food Systems, and I did say that he was allowed to say go green if he wished, as well as several groups working to strengthen outreach and research support for food systems needs and priorities in the land-grant university system, and someone should ask him about potted meat. I'd also like to introduce Dr. Angela Chalk, who's a fourth-generation resident of the 7th Ward in New Orleans. She's the founder and executive director of Healthy Community Services, a nonprofit located in the 7th Ward. She is past president of the Louisiana Public Health Association and a retired civil service employee with the Louisiana Department of Health. Dr. Chalk is a member of numerous boards and organizations working to promote health and sustainability in the context of climate change, including serving on the American Public Health Association Center for Climate, Health, and Equity Steering Committee, and as a member of the Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana Advisory Committee. We're far from the first to call upon her expertise. She's testified before Congress's Subcommittee on Waters, Oceans, and Wildlife, and was recently asked by the National Audubon Society to create a statewide native plant curriculum for Louisiana. She's also been recognized as a national green infrastructure practitioner, and she's a climate health ambassador with Eco America. So I'm so excited to hear from both of you tonight. Thank you for joining us. And I'm going to turn it over. I think Marcus is kicking us off, right? Is that right? Okay. So Dr. Coleman, it's to you.
Hey, y'all. Thank y'all for having me here today. I'm excited about this opportunity to talk about food systems, and some of the things that we're doing down here in Louisiana. Let me throw some slides up. I'm going to walk through a conversation led by a few slides here that will sort of keep me on track in my busy brain with the things that we have going on here. So we sort of given some background information about who I am. I'm a native of a small town called Knowlton, Louisiana, in the rural northeastern corner of the state. Farming community. The primary commodities that are grown in that area of the state are cotton, corn, soybeans. And so agriculture and parts of the food system are things that I've always been around since I was a baby. My master's degree is in agricultural economics from Michigan State University. Go Green. I'm sure I won't get many go whites on this particular call. And then I did my PhD here in Louisiana at Louisiana State University. And so many of the things that I'm involved with, I'm really interested in food system engagement and food system leadership. So many of my activities relate to that. I'm very proud to be a board member for 2 community-based organizations focused on food system development. So we have Sprout NOLA here in New Orleans that does some great work with training new and beginning farmers in farmer development and new and beginning farmer engagement here in the state, as well as the Groundswell Center up in Ithaca, New York. Just a wonderful organization. So, this work is something for me it's been interesting for me. I've made a career out of it, and I really enjoy engaging with people from around the country about many of these topics. And that led me now to hanging out at Tulane with a joint appointment in economics. In strategy, leadership, and analytics, where I teach a global food economics course, but also environmental economics there at Tulane. So I'm very excited about that. I'm very excited about today. Let's jump into this thing. It's food system literacy conversation. We'll pop the first question up here that I have for you these tonight. Which of the following best describes a food system? And that poll should be popping up there. It should be on your screen here. Which of the following best describes a food system? And I popped that question up first because I'm going to go through a conversation about we can describe or define food systems in many different ways. And if you get into conversations across the board in various communities, many folks have a different take on what a food system is. And so I'm going to define what I mean by a food system when I talk about food systems. And then I'll define what I mean when I describe food access. And then I'll talk about some new and beginning farmer issues that we've found throughout the work that we have here, the work that we've done here in Louisiana, particularly the trainings that we've seen down in the New Orleans area, where I got to meet Angela and work with Angela about 2-3 years ago. So what best describes a food system? And in many cases, there's no right or wrong answer to this. And even if I was to get into the scenario where I was to throw local food system, what describes a local food system, you could do that. And so the poll results here, the vast majority of you said all of the above, and that's correct. All of these statements can define or describe what we mean by a food system. And so as we move forward in this discussion, so what I mean when I'm talking about food systems, or I'm defining food systems, I'm talking about the processes that relate to growing, how we transform, transport, sell, exchange food, and the overall impacts that that system has on a diverse base of individuals, businesses, and communities. And so society at large, how those processes impact those communities. And so as I flow through this, I look at food access from the perspective of how well does the agri-food system meet the needs of a diverse base of consumers and communities and businesses. And so again, that process of this agri-food system, as we call it, is broken down into 4 categories. And these 4 categories are what were described in the definition that I just showed. And so more specifically, we talk about how, and let me do one thing here, I want a pointer, how the supply of food, really drives the growth, the transformation, the transportation, and the selling and exchange processes, and how all of that information, or how all of those processes are driven by consumer demand. And so we have the different components that we study related to the food system. Input suppliers, you have the production of the farmers and the ranchers, the processors and the manufacturers, the distributors, the retailers, and the consumers. A piece of this, from an agribusiness or an agricultural economics perspective, when we study, that's typically left out of these conversations, is direct marketing. So the more local agriculture, the more local food system conversations are part of this in the direct marketing piece. And I think that's a very important piece of it. And when we're talking about sustainability in other areas, particularly when we get into conversations about environmental impacts, local agriculture and direct marketing is a very important piece of this. One piece that I don't show here, there's another distribution piece of this that I've always failed to include, and it was just pointed out to me the other day. This distribution piece between food retailers and consumers. So traditionally, consumers would go to the grocery store, walk around the aisles, pick food items, and buy their groceries. And now we have food delivery services where consumers have food and prepared food products delivered right to their homes. And so that's another piece of the distribution system here, that this model, and I have to go back and revise this model to account for those areas of the food system. It's something that we need to take into context. So when I'm talking about the food system, or the agri-food system, if you will, I'm talking about all these core components here, driven by both supply and demand factors. That's my economics plug for this evening. Talking about a framework for food access as I see it. And so food access, we're really looking at the intersection of food access in this food system, or this agri-food system. And that's led by the 5 A's of these 5 constructs, as I'll define them here, which really, when I study and when I do work related to food access, I'm viewing it from these 5 components. And so, of course, in many cases, the main component of this is this notion of affordability. So focusing on food prices, or consumer perceptions of what food prices are at the locations to which they purchase their food products. We can also look at areas of accessibility. How easy is it for a consumer to get to a location where food is sold or exchanged, or availability. So looking at the sufficiency of the food supply at various retail locations. And so typically when we do studies related to this, food access or food insecurity, we focus on those 3 constructs, but we can also look at these areas of acceptability and accommodation. And so, when we talk about accommodation, how well do local sources accept and adapt to the local consumer needs in various communities. We can also look at acceptability from the perspective of what are consumers' attitudes towards the attributes that their local food products give to them. And so I look at a framework for food access, and typically in how I keep my thoughts kind of constrained in order to be productive. This is how I look at and how I view and study and define food access in the work that we're doing. So the second question that we'll ask before I move into the next piece of this, answering this, blank deals with the various stages that a consumer goes through when making a decision to purchase various food or food products for their end use. So is that consumer behavior, consumer interest, consumer attitude, or consumer perception? So this process or this flow or that a consumer's or the actions that a consumer takes in going through the decision process to purchase various type of food and food products to do whatever it is that they want to do as consumers at the end of the process. So what is that? What is this process? What is this process? What is this process defined? What is it called? Consumer behavior, consumer interest, consumer attitude, or consumer perception. We'll give that a few minutes to get some responses in here. And certainly at the end of this, make sure that you drop those questions in the Q&A box. I know I'm kind of breezing through some of this stuff with my colleague Angela. I want to make sure that I give her all the time that she needs to give you her information, and then we'll double back and answer some questions towards the end of this. Consumer behavior, consumer interest, consumer attitude, or consumer perception. And let's see what we have here. So the majority of you, 58% of you said consumer behavior, and that is correct. So another interest of mine, and consumer behavior here is the correct answer. Another interest of mine related to understanding consumers and how consumers are influencing the food system looks at consumer behavior. And so there are a number of things that determine or factors that go into defining what consumer behavior is. But primarily when we look at this from an economic perspective here, these various factors are also driven by income. So we look at this hierarchy of consumer needs here driven by income. At its very base level, consumer behavior for food, or consumers purchase food, if you will, simply because it's nutritious, safe, and affordable. And as consumer income increases, the variety of reasons why consumers purchase foods begins to change. And so you make a little bit more money, you can now be concerned with, food tasting good. This goes back to the joke that Margot made at the beginning about potted meat. Growing up in the country, we have a lot of, even as an undergraduate student, we eat potted meat, sardines, Vienna sausage, things like that. But as a little disposable income increases, we began to purchase different types of food. We began to take into consideration the taste of food, or different aspects of the convenience of how the type of food products that we purchase, are they convenient to us? Variety in that. And then, at the very top level of kind of the income driving for consumer behavior for food, consumers can, tend to worry about health more, and then different statuses and causes become a part of that. And so looking at these factors and the drive behind consumer purchase behavior for food, we know that there are a number of other things. And so culture, family, environment, economic reality, available financial resources, and prices all play a factor into the decision to purchase food. But I think that this pyramid here gives us a very general but broad way to understand, or how we can categorize consumer behavior for food. Now, I do realize that this isn't an exhaustive example here. We're talking about consumers in general, and we know that consumers vary and are very diverse and have different wants and needs across the board. But again, this is just kind of a centering activity for better understanding the concept of consumer behavior for this regard. I'll shift into a discussion about new and beginning farmers. And so looking at food systems and food access and understanding consumer behavior are my broad interests in this area of food system leadership. But I've also done work in training new and beginning farmers here in the state of Louisiana. And as I mentioned earlier, that's how I met Angela. So I'll just touch on a few key points that we've seen from this work, and then we can come back and have more of the discussion at the Q&A perspective. And so if we look at this notion about why are new and beginning farmers important for the U.S. agri-food or agricultural system here, our existing farmer network is aging. And so, we need a new generation. We need new sets of farmers in order to build more community-based food system to ensure that consumers can have access to the various type of food products that they demand. There's also a need here, and we see this specifically in Louisiana too, to diversify both agriculture and the food system. And so connecting our new and beginning farmers with experienced producers for transfer of knowledge, additional opportunities for socially disadvantaged and underrepresented groups, including veterans in that in that conversation. Also reinvigorating the traditional notion of a family farm and bringing that back into this food system context. but also diversifying the types of crops that are grown. If we can do these things, and we can really include these things in how we define community economic development. And so there are several cities across the country that have brought in local food systems and food and agriculture as a part of community development. And so agriculture and food system leadership and food system development can be a key aspect of this. Food and agriculture in particular, can be a great for individual physical, mental, and nutritional health. Becoming one with the land, physical activities, eating healthy, all of those can be associated with how we work with and develop new and beginning farmers. The last couple of pieces that I'll point out here is the opportunities for new and beginning farmers. And these are the things that we see here in Louisiana, and you can see these things broadly around the country. At the end of the day, folks have to eat. And so there's always an opportunity for folks to grow food and create agribusinesses around food. What we know is that consumers have very diverse palates, but also, diversity within this. We know that there's a need for increased both availability and accessibility to affordable, healthful food options at the local level. So there's opportunities in communities around the country for folks to tap into, be engaged in this. The local foods movement. COVID-19 is done some great things for local foods, as opposed to the many other things that we could say about COVID-19, but specifically related to food. It's provided opportunities for more food to be grown to local level. More consumers want to know where their food comes from. We have more growing base of alternative market availability, growth in farmers market, community supported agriculture programs, pop-up shops, roadside stands. The opportunities for those type of activities are growing. But also we have, we can talk about the affordability and the availability of more traditional agricultural land, these large plots of land that we saw in rural communities, but also, the availability of non-traditional lands, both in rural and urban areas. The vacant lands that we see provide opportunities for agricultural production. We see urban agriculture happening in many cities around the country that are providing opportunities for new and beginning farmers to be engaged in that regard. But also, and these are just a few things that we've seen related to the opportunities for new and beginning farmers. This also comes on the other side. There are a number of threats that we have to be concerned with. We have to continue to fight and lobby for additional access to resources and information for new and beginning farmers. And so, capital resources, limited traditional access to land for folks that don't come from traditional agricultural backgrounds, the hyper land price inflation that we're seeing with the competing uses for traditional agricultural land, access to credit and financing to purchase land and to purchase the high cost of agricultural inputs that are needed for production is a key barrier to many new and beginning farmers that we see here. Knowledge, and so making sure that folks that are interested in agriculture and the food system, interested in farming, have access to information and trainings, but also plugging them into broader support networks for information. A lot of the folks that we're beginning to see that are interested in new and beginning farmers, like I said, we're working with here in Louisiana, many of these folks don't come from traditional agricultural backgrounds. And so training and access to information is a key need that many of our institutions that are designed to do these things aren't always as efficient and effective with transferring that information as we'd like to see there. Limited market access. And so with that, we see opportunities for the creation of different types of market availability, but also confronting the historical racial and gender inequities that we've seen in agriculture and foods in the food system throughout its history. And that history has been long written. We can go back to even moving forward from the time of slavery through the time of civil rights, and how those things have transformed agriculture and the food system, particularly here in the southeastern corner of the U.S. And the last threat that I'll point out here before I turn it over to Angela here, with respect to new and beginning farmers, is just respect. It's difficult for with traditional rural farmers or commodity growers that I was used to here, having those individuals who are growing on 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 acres and growing commodity crops on this, having conversations with them versus having conversations with individuals that are growing on a fourth of an acre on an urban plot. We've done a lot of, we've tried to do a lot of work in the state to bring those two types of growers together and create this mutual respect and understanding among farmers for their levels of development and to assist with that. So that was a really quick overview of some of the things that I have going on here. And I want to turn it over to Angela so she can talk about some of the really cool stuff that she has going on over in the 7th Ward. This is the 7th Ward, Queen of New Orleans, about to drop some knowledge here. So I'll turn it over to Angela.
Thank you so very much. And as usual, you're so kind. I'm Dr. Angela Chalk, and I'm coming to you from the 7th Ward section of New Orleans. And I am the Executive Director for Healthy Community Services, which is a nonprofit that's based here in the 7th Ward. I have no relationships or conflicts of interest present as I bring this to you. And so our scope of programming for our organization looks at coastal resiliency, stormwater management, and urban ag at the intersection of public health. And if you can imagine, just for the urban ag part and the climate issues that we're suffering all across the country, it becomes harder for food to become both available, accessible, and affordable. And what we're doing here at Healthy Community Services here in the 7th Ward is that we're engaging residents, we're educating them, and we're empowering them to make those decisions for their families regarding their safety, their access to food, and being resilient with doing that. And so food is cultural, no matter where you are at on this globe. It's a cultural issue. And here in New Orleans in particular, we get up in the morning, we eat breakfast, and we are asking what's for lunch. And then once we have lunch, we're asking what's for dinner. And so these are our customs and social institutions that incorporate who we are as a people around our food. And if you happen to live in an area that is bountiful, such as Southeast Louisiana, with all the access to seafood and the crops that grow as a result of the sediment from the Mississippi River, you can have some of the best tasting food and access to food that you can ever imagine. So if you've never been to New Orleans, it's really kind of hard to get a bad meal here. There are some places, I'm not going to say 100%, but it's 99% if you're eating in our city and in our state. It's really hard to get a bad meal. And so what one has to do is to increase their competency around this issue. So if you've never grown food, and many of you said that you've never grown food, then I would advise you to seek that out. It's going to be trial and error. You'll fail at it, but the reward that you get from seeing something that you grow come up through the soil, the connection that you have to the soil that you actually grew what it is that you've planned to eat, or even if you become an agripreneur, as they say these days, you can have that reward. This is a dish when we first started introducing residents to healthy food options. So even though we like our rich sauces and our fried foods, we still can modify foods that we can make healthy choices and have access to healthy food choices that we have a good meal with. And so according to the USDA, 23.5 million Americans don't have access to access to food, and they're more than a mile away from a grocery. And that food insecurity only increased during the pandemic. And I'll reference the podcast from your own Arison and Lou at the University of Michigan. To the left of the screen are some peppers. So you can start off simple with things just as simple as peppers. I chose to have Louisiana native peppers, and you can see what's native to your area, because that means that that plant or that vegetable or that herb will grow better in your area. So look for your USDA growing zones. So I wouldn't suspect that you would be able to grow a Creole tomato in Michigan because that soil composition is unique to Louisiana that helps us to grow those types of crops. And then also look at the other equal benefits that growing your own food has. Herbs can be used as pollinators. In this picture, we have purple basil. And purple basil is rare. So, but nonetheless, if you can get a hold of purple basil, then you can begin to grow your own purple basil. And then it's easy for you to take clippings, and from there you can grow additional purple basil that you may, again, pursue in the agripreneur, excuse me, an agro-entrepreneurial business that you can then grow that outside of the area, so of its known area. But look at what the other benefits are of not just growing food for you, the benefits that we have to our ecosystem. And then you can grow the vegetables that you like to eat. And so why would you grow something that you don't like to eat? That doesn't make any sense. Use what your taste palettes are, research it, find out what grows in your area, and then just start. You can start as simple as in a container garden. And there are all sorts of containers that you can buy on the internet that can help you to grow these things in container gardens. And actually container gardens are great now because you can grow in small spaces. So you don't have to have large plots of land in which to grow your own food. Here at Healthy Community Services, we have 4 raised beds. And as you see these raised beds with the water system going, what you can't see is that we're also managing water. So as we have intense and more frequent rainfalls, so as we are naturally receiving this rainfall, we're also managing water on the property that this green infrastructure farm is, and that's what we call it. And surprisingly, when I went to a conference, more growers are becoming aware of the need to be able to control for water, to control for other climate and weather events. And so while I thought I was inventing something new, no, it wasn't, but it's become more of a topic. And hence we have the intersection of not only being resilient and sustainable, but it's an efficient way to grow food as well. And so at our organization, we have our greenhouse, a 100 square foot greenhouse that allows us to start with seeds and then transplant them into the raised beds and have programming for residents who do not have access to food. How I came to this work was that I just got fed up with the cost of food. And so I'm like, a bell pepper was maybe like $1.29, but a packet of seeds for bell pepper may have been $1. So I can get a packet of seeds, grow my own bell peppers, and have 10 bell peppers for the cost of what I was spending for one. So when you look at access, affordability, and availability, this will make you, if you get angry like me over the cost of food, you'll do something about it. And that's what I did. I decided to do something about it, not only for me, but to bring access to residents of my community who are low income. And so it brings also about a sense of community when you can get together around a common issue. And that common issue was our climate and being able to grow food. And so the takeaway for each of you tonight is just to start growing your food and sit down with your family and enjoy a meal. This is my family. And so the question that I have for you is, what is the official drink for the state of Louisiana? So can we put that poll up? So is it milk, coffee, or beer? So as we're waiting for that, if you see your screen, to the left of your screen is what we call the Creole tomato and the melon. These are some of the best dishes that you can have. And you can just eat the Creole tomato just with regular salt and pepper, or to use the melon in a casserole to make a casserole. And so while they may look like vegetables, they're actually fruits. So there's the poll results. Have somebody been online looking at the results? So most of you said coffee. Well, no, the correct answer is milk. And that milk came about being the state's official drink as a result of the dairy industry working with the state of Louisiana and recognizing the role that dairy farmers play in our state agriculture economy. So that's all that I have. Thank you all for sharing your time with us. And then I'll turn it back over to Winona.
All right. Thank you both. Okay, so don't go anywhere. This is where we get to talk a little bit. So thank you so much for giving us a little bit of an overview of what you do in Louisiana. I won't say New Orleans because it's not just New Orleans, but in Louisiana. So the thing that I love about this class is that we have community members, we have folks from the nutrition realm, we have public health, we have environmental. But when you're thinking about what people across the board can do, what are some of the things that you would want them, some of the important things to think about when it comes to environmental issues around food and beginning farmers and smaller farmers?
Let me take that. So the reason that Healthy Community Services focuses on container gardens and raised beds is because of the environmental injustices around our area with the petrochemical plants along the river parishes. And then people are still concerned about lead contamination post-Katrina. As we clean up and things, these are things that we don't think about. So as we're renovating and renewing, there's lead contamination in the soil, there's lead contamination in our water sources. And so I would say for people to, first of all, before you grow anything, to get a soil sample to know what's in your soil, because nothing is going to grow if you don't have good soil. And then as you're purchasing soil, if you're using containers or raised beds, purchase good reliable soil from someone that you know is a good soil producer. Just don't buy the dollar bag. Like my grandpa used to say, you get what you pay for. If you buy a dollar bag of soil, you might get anything in that soil. So take the time, spend a little extra money, start out small, and then build from there.
Thank you for that. And Marcus, did you want to add anything with beginner farmers, what you would want people to take away?
I think the thing that folks can take away is that there are opportunities for you, and the thing, the misperception that most people have to be a beginning farmer is that you have to have a lot of land. And we have a number of different examples of people growing within inner cities, particularly started out in inner city New Orleans, growing on 1/8 of an acre or 1/4 of an acre and starting their operation. And so the best advice for folks that are interested in farming is just start, right? Start with what you have. Learn, seek out. There are a number of great books out that you can seek out and just read about production and the business management aspect of farming. And so seek out resources and information and just start. Find a market opportunity, whether it's a local farmers market or whether you want to organize something in your neighborhood, your community, on your campus. Just do it. Take the Nike approach. Just do it and work through it. I mean, it's just like being an entrepreneur in any other regard. You just have to start the process and carry it through.
Thanks.
And I'll add too, as we talk about that, once you get into learning how to grow your own food, you start to look at the other areas of agriculture that we don't think about, such as beekeeping or raising chickens or raising cattle. I'm not going to raise cattle, but but I have considered.
Angela has a cow in her backyard, y'all.
No, I don't. But with the cost of eggs, I am considering raising chickens so that I can have my own eggs. And whatever it is that I do here with Healthy Community Services, it's not just for me, it's for the people of my neighborhood, that brings about that sense of community for the person who does not have access to healthy food choices or who have limited income that they can't buy healthy food options. It bothers me to no end when I see a child eating Skittles for breakfast. So did you not have access at least to oatmeal or grits? But Skittles, and I can't blame that child because I don't know their circumstance, but it bothers me to no end to see a child eating Skittles for breakfast, or they're shopping with their other siblings. And I've seen this, they're shopping with their other siblings at Walgreens, and they're buying the bags of chips, the 3 for $1 bags of chips. So that tells me that that child does not have access to food, healthy food options, and the only meal that they're probably getting is through school.
So you bring up, when you talk about access and people, especially like children and families not being able to get what they need, what role do you see equity playing in that? We touch in this class a lot on food sovereignty, food justice, and equity issues. Do you see any of those issues in play, and how do they relate in your work?
Because we have this country has really so much food, and there's so much food waste in our country. What I would tell people again is to start to grow your own food. You can control the quantity, and whatever is left, whatever excess you may have, share that. I mean, there's always been a sense of community. I can remember as a child, we had a fig tree. My grandfather had a fig tree, and I live in the same property that my 5 generations of my family have lived on. And just share whatever it is that you have. And I see that as the work that we're doing here. My neighbors are doing that exact thing when they're growing things out. I came home and I found papaya on the porch, but they didn't leave a note, so I wasn't eating that. I didn't know who left that there. But if you're gonna share, leave a note for whoever it is you're leaving it for.
You don't want the poison papaya.
Oh, I did not.
That's funny. And Marcus, did you want to add anything?
Equity in the food system in agriculture in general is something that's, we've had issues for decades and centuries. And I always look at both agriculture and the food system as 2 different perspectives. But related to equity in food, I think, we really can be equitable when our food system, when we as individuals, we as consumers, take our food into our own hands, right? And that can mean many different things for many people. I appreciate the approach that Angela, really highlighted. Reminds me of growing up in rural Louisiana, where my great grandfather, had a garden in the backyard, right? We would go hunting, rabbit hunting, squirrel hunting, I'm that country. We had chickens where we would go out and get eggs. And so, you went to the grocery store to supplement what you couldn't grow on your own, what you couldn't go out and hunt for. And neighbors shared things with you. And so when we look at equitable food systems, equitable food access, the consumers, the citizens, the individuals have the power in that system to really foster that. And so we know that there are some systemic issues, related to food and agriculture across the nation. And those things have, it's in many cases it's by design, and it didn't happen overnight. But at the end of the day, we as consumers have power to change things, and we may not be able to change it as a nation as a whole at one time, but we can start at the neighborhood level, at the community level, and taking back the power of our food within ourselves, and doing what we can at a local level, and then spreading and broadening that process out to friends and family abroad. And that's just how we take the equitable approach and take the power back within our food.
I love that.
I'm sorry, Renona. And Marcus, just to piggyback on that, I can't, my parents grew up during the Depression, and they said how hard, they didn't realize that they were poor, and because they always had something to eat, because when the question came up, did they go to soup lines and eat? And my aunts and my parents say, well, no, we didn't. The soup line was for the white folks. It wasn't for the Black folks. We grew our food. So they didn't even realize that there was a shortage of food, because there was always food on the table, whether it was red beans and rice or making their own biscuits from flour. But they, like you said, they had to purchase those other items that they couldn't grow, because we weren't growing wheat here in Southeast Louisiana. But we ate, my uncles, they fished, and they would go into the swamps and catch the turtles to make kawa. And so we were eating pretty good as for Black folks during that time up until now. And I can't ever remember a time where any of me or my siblings or my cousins were hungry, because there was always food here. And so that it was a result of us growing our own food. And so I say to people, get back to that.
And little art of canning, and a deep freeze is a wonderful thing that we may use when you grow up in rural areas. You grow things during the season, and like you said, we had a fig tree. My great grandfather had a fig tree in his backyard, and my great grandmother, canning was a big thing in those communities, and so that's how you preserve those things. And I think that if we get back to those subtle nuances of doing those little things in communities, we can get by. But growing up in rural Louisiana, and even still to this day, I couldn't go down the street and go to McDonald's, and get shop off the dollar menu. The nearest McDonald's was 30 minutes away, and I couldn't drive at that time, so I wasn't trying to do that. So you ate what was at home, whether you liked it or you didn't. And so there was always food in the pantry by canning. Stuff was in the deep freezer, whether we hunted or whether we grew collard and mustard greens, and my grandmother would blanch those mustard greens and put them in the freezer for whenever, just things like that made a difference for us. And we didn't have to want. We may not have been the richest folks in the world, but we didn't want for anything, because we had those processes in place.
I love it. So really touching on food sovereignty, the importance of food sovereignty and local food systems. The questions are piling up from our audience members, our participants. So I'm gonna just jump to a couple of those, if that's okay.
So boss nostrils, that's why we had that intro song. We can handle it.
That's
At least I hope so.
One of the questions came in: what role does nutrition and food education play in the food system? This person is thinking, Sarah's thinking specifically about the farm to school movement, but the question, okay, is moving. And I lost the question.
Well, I think generally food education is key, and that's why I always start off with that kind of general, that whole process of growing, transformation, transportation, and selling and exchange of food, just so folks can have a general understanding of what the food system or what the broader food system look like. And I know there's some different nuances there that kind of is split out, but I just think that if consumers had a better understanding of what the food system looks like, it would help us in our nutritional decisions, or decisions to purchase the type of food. I think farm to school programs are very important from the perspective that you have many young people, many elementary school kids, and even high school kids that if you ask them where does an egg come from, they'll tell you Walmart, or they'll tell you the neighborhood grocery store. And so just understanding what an actual chicken is, right? Understanding what broccoli looks like in the field. I was hanging out with a buddy a couple of days ago. We were talking about broccoli, and he works with USDA Farm Service Agency. We grew up in rural Louisiana, so we only know what cotton, corn, and soybeans, maybe some sorghum looks like. He said that he was grown before he actually knew what broccoli looked like in the field. And so, just having a general education that there's more to the food system than going to the grocery store. There's an entire process that happens prior to the final consumer getting that food. And I think if we understood with that process, if we're able to, then we can make better decisions about nutritional decisions and purchase decisions about food.
And then from a child's perspective, having seen where food comes from, and then having the ability to taste it. That way you can't say, I don't like that. Well, have you ever eaten it before? Well, no, children tend to tell you they don't like the foods that their parents don't like. But once a child is exposed to and being responsible for growing their own food and being able to taste it, that changes their whole perspective on the food systems. Because I was a grown woman before I ate cabbage, and I didn't like greens, and my father's I did not.
Me either. I'm with you.
Yeah, and
Don't
my
put none of that
father's
till I was grown.
family is from Central Louisiana, and so that's all that they grew in Central Louisiana was those types of crops and pecans. And I will not pay for unshelled pecans to this day, because my great aunt had us sitting on the porch picking peas and shelling pecans, and so now if the pecans are not cracked and shelled, I'm not buying them. But we do have someone in our Grow Louisiana class who are pecan farmers. So I'll just go there and use my connections if I just needed fresh shelled pecans. But being able to see the food as it grows, touching the soil, knowing that it's almost like birthing a baby, honestly, when you put in, and I know you don't know anything about that, Marcus, but when you see a seed, something from a seed that grows into the food that you've actually produced and you eat it, it's an amazing thing when you see that first sign of life come up through the soil. And so again, I would just tell people just to start. You may find something that you like that you may not have previously had any connection to it, but growing your own food, you will definitely have your connection to your food.
That's an important point too, because if you understand where your food comes from, you have a different appreciation for it, right? If you've seen broccoli in the field, if you've seen whether it's a small farm or a large couple 100,000 acre farm, about where different products come from, you garner a different appreciation for those things. You have a different appreciation for a steak if you ever had to palpate a cow. We won't get into animal science, but if you've ever had to go through that process, you look at a steak very differently in a cow. And related to your pecan story, Angela, I have bad memories of pecans. And so when I was growing up, if you wanted to buy something, you simply didn't go ask mom and dad or grandmother for that. We had a big pecan tree in the backyard, and my great grandfather had 3 or 4 in their backyard. And so during the fall, when those pecans were on the ground, if I needed money, I had to go pick up those pecans and then sell them for a couple cents a pound and make up that. So I have some memories about pecans in there too.
Okay, so now if I need some fresh pecans, I know. No,
I got some in there. Yeah, I can ship them to you.
Okay. Like I said, we're getting a lot of good questions. How to pick. So one question that came, how can you make changes in the food system without growing your own food when it isn't accessible? Like living in an apartment or with little sunlight. Any suggestions for folks who can't grow their own food?
Grow herbs. If you can't grow anything, in the way that we live in a world now, it's kind of hard to say that you can't grow anything, even in small spaces. Those grow bags that at that online retailer that everybody purchases from, they sell those fairly inexpensively, and you can control, because that's what farmers are doing now on large scales. They're controlling for climate. And so you can control for climate no matter where you live, because farmers now are being able to extend their growing season because of climate change. So if farmers can do it on a large scale, you certainly can do it on a small scale. Go in with somebody. If you can't afford it yourself, I mean, you're not the only person that's eating. Talk to a neighbor. I mean, go in and share the cost of buying good soil, grow bags, the seeds that you have. Is really inexpensive, and I guarantee you the reward that you get and the bounty that you will get from that endeavor will change your life. You won't ever look at food in the grocery store the same way. Just start. Call us. We'll tell you. Just start. And you'll fail at it. I'm not going to lie and tell you that you're not going to fail at it. You will fail at it, but keep reading what grows in your area and contact your local ag extension agent in your area. I was just looking at what's growing now here in Louisiana, and you will become proficient at it. I promise you.
Just 2 quick points related to that. One, you don't need much to grow in. So I have friends that live in an apartment complex, and it's a benefit if you have a balcony. And so, particularly if you live in Michigan and you have a balcony, doing when it warms up in May or June before it actually gets some warmth there, you can plant a tomato plant in a flower pot and put on your balcony. If you have a corner of your apartment where you can get some decent sunlight when the sun comes back up in May in Michigan, right? You can grow in those spaces. There are a number of different resources that our land grant institutions have that will assist us. And so in Michigan, the land grant institution is Michigan State University. And so look at their horticulture programs. There should be a number of growing guides for whether you're at home or you're growing at a larger scale. But just remember that it doesn't take much to grow now. If you plant a pot with one tomato plant, you're not going to grow enough tomatoes to feed the neighborhood in that regard, or even bell peppers or just something. But at least it's a part of the process, and just learning how to grow, learning how to nurture something from the seed up. And as you potentially move on, potentially expand, you'll have that knowledge then to expand as you begin to move on in life. But there are always opportunities. Also seek out community gardens. If there are community gardens in your area, that'll allow you, even if you're space limited in an apartment or something like that, seek out a local community garden or something, or even reach out to a local farmer and just see if you can have a corner of a spot, when it warms up, to grow a few things on there. There's no such thing as a bad question. So just ask folks. If folks have some property, just ask them to do that. If you can have access to some space. So that's a starting process.
Okay, you're making me feel better about my little herbs and tomatoes, but that wasn't much. So I look for the farmers, that my friends who are farmers, and I support them. So that's another thing. You talked a little bit about controlling for climate. We have a question. Do you see urban farming as a viable way for farmers to get into the farming industry? And how would an urban farmer successfully control climate and environment to create a quality product?
That's a loaded question. But first of all, there are opportunities for urban farmers. And so if we look at, urban farming, small scale agriculture, in direct marketing, whether you're selling in a farmer's market, you're just doing some pop-up shops, a roadside stand, there are a number of different opportunities for that. And there are some folks, there are plenty of successful stories about how people have started on 1/4 of an acre or 1/8 of an acre on a city block, and have built a farm and have built a successful agribusiness, and then have scaled up. And so I was at a conference and I met a farmer from North Carolina that started out on about 1/4 of an acre. He eventually, it was selling at farmers markets, eventually scaled up to about 80 acres. And now he no longer sells at farmers markets, and he primarily sells at grocery store chains. And so he started out small, sold locally, and then scaled up. He even scaled up to the point where he bought some acreage in the Dominican Republic and was going to grow something like avocados or something like that and import back into the U.S. And so, there are opportunities, and so you have to become skilled at the craft of growing. You have to understand both the science of agriculture, but also the business aspects of it as well. And so if you're growing in urban lots, understanding the soil science. And so like Angela said earlier, soil testing, understanding your soil composition, understanding how you amend your soil in order to grow those greater products. In a place like Michigan, understanding your growing season, understand what grows well at different points in time of the year, and looking at different facilities and structures, whether you're going to do greenhouse growing, whether you're going to look at some other off the ground method of growing. There are all kinds of successful models that are out there that we can utilize, but it's really based upon what you want to do and how much time and energy you want to invest in becoming a master of that craft. And so, we have River Queen Greens here down in New Orleans is a very successful model. It started growing on about an eighth or a fourth of an acre in the down in the Bywater area of New Orleans. Farmers market, primarily farmers market, and it's transitioned into a successful CSA model of about, well, pre-Hurricane Ida, that they had about 200 subscribers to that. And they recently purchased 80 acres. And so they've expanded their farm from about a fourth of an acre to 80 acres on the west bank of New Orleans. And so, you know, there are a number of great examples of how you can do this work. Ellen Polishuk has a very good book to talk about how building a farm. John Martin Fortier has a good book about starting small. The Market Gardener, I think is the name of that book. And so, you know, you don't have to come from an agricultural background, have grown on a farm or grown up in the country to do this. There are as I said earlier, many of the folks that we work with now that want to be normal beginning farmers don't come from traditional agricultural backgrounds, but you have to be willing to invest in the science and the business of the craft to be successful.
Oh, thanks. We've gotten some really good questions. So thank you everybody for keep putting these questions in here. This one, I think we really should touch on. So it said, could you discuss differentiating between encouraging people to take food production into their own hands versus neoliberalism mentalities and pull yourself up by your bootstraps type of rhetoric? We all know that there's systemic changes that need to be done. How do you balance between looking at systemic changes? I know, but Angela, that's a big question. I can see. How do you balance between those systemic changes and wanting to like food sovereignty and take things into your own hands? What's the balance that you strike?
The balance that I strike is realizing that government cannot and will not do what you need to do for you personally. And so you have to take that personal responsibility for yourself and your family. If I was going to wait on government to feed me, I would have my Janet Jackson wait from the Control album. But you as an individual have the power. And I spoke about that earlier, the 3 E's: engage, educate, and empower. Once you have the power and the knowledge, no one can take that away from you. And having valid and reliable knowledge. There's a lot of things that's out there that a lot of people will do that I just won't do. But if it's valid and reliable, and from experts, or even from, and experts doesn't mean being defined as the person with the academic degrees. It's the person that's been doing this true, for years, tried and true, as to what they've done in growing things. We use, and I know it's going to sound crazy, but we can use beer in tin plants to control for pests. That's not going to be in any academic book that you see, but that's been tried and tested for farmers for many years. Here's the other thing that I would say to that: get with a generational farmer that's an elder that can teach you a lot. And I'm thinking of the farmer down in Plaquemines Parish, Marcus, that has the 100-year-old seeds from the Melitone. George, with George's Produce. I can't think of George's last name. I can't think of his name, but get with, you will learn so much as a young person to sit down and talk with a generational person, and don't go in asking questions, just have a conversation. And you'll learn a lot through a conversation. You will learn a lot over a meal. A lot of the things that I've learned now that I'm older, I'm appreciative of it, was through a meal over the dinner table, whether it was at my house or with my aunts here in New Orleans, where in the 7th Ward or in Central Louisiana, we had to shell peas. So when we were shelling peas, there were a lot of conversations that you can have during the course of that, or planning. So I would say get with the multi-generational person or persons and learn from that individual what they would have, and just don't rely solely on government. I'm not saying not to use some of the benefits that government provides. I'm just saying that that should not be your be all end all for you if you want to change.
So I'll approach that fun question in two ways, I think. If we're looking at, and that's why I always like to go back to that food system diagram. If we look at that broader food system diagram and understanding that, many of those different constructs in there are dominated by a few very large firms, particularly in the processing manufacturing area and even on a retail perspective. Those firms have only been able to grow because they're responding to consumer demand, right? And so their global success, their profitability, their dominance in the marketplace is in response to providing consumers the type of food products they want to deal with. And so understanding that dynamic, but also understanding sort of the policy role in that. So that larger, broader food system is pushed by the consumers. Similarly, just as the political side of it, the governmental piece of it is driven by the voters. And so how do you understand it and provide and look at a bridge between the two areas of that question really relates to, and it's why I focus on food system leadership at the community level. So for every neighborhood or every community that you better educate about the choices and how they interact within that system, if they have the means to do so, because I do understand that food insecurity is a key aspect of it in serving that. But for educating individuals, educating neighborhoods, educating consumers about the broader aspects of it, I think that helps in helping individuals make different decisions about how they engage in that system. I think when people are better educated, they make different decisions about how they support this. And so if we understand that if I'm going to buy a food product from Meijer, I'm going to Meijer and buying stuff that, out of every dollar that I spend on food, only about 8 cents of that dollar goes to the farmer. I think if consumers better understood that, those that had the means to do so would then shift their purchases to go to the local farmers market, where the 100% of every dollar that you spend on food goes to that local farmer, right? If the consumer has the means to do that. And so that educational piece there is key. And I understanding that I can't fight this largest system to do that, but I can play my role in helping consumers have a better understanding of the systemic structures that led us to get to where we are. And only that for every individual that is educated, every individual that is knowledgeable about the choices that they make, whether that's in the grocery store, whether that's in the voting polls, all of those things go into the process of making the necessary changes that we need in the food system.
And I'll add as well, know the difference between organic and naturally grown, because in some instances, you're organic, naturally grown, and conventional, because in some instances, organic crops are growing right next to conventional crops. And so you're paying more for organic crops that's growing and on the next row is conventionally grown crops. So we go back to the environment again. So when these large farms are producing, do you think if they're spraying for pesticides, that those pesticides are going to go right where they're intended to go? The answer to that is no, because there are other environmental factors that's controlling the drift of those pesticides. And so knowing the difference between organic, conventional, and naturally grown can help you to make better choices of the foods that you select. And then finally, realize that those of us who receive, not me, but I mean, SNAP benefits, those who receive SNAP benefits, buying the plant is food. So you can use your SNAP benefits to actually buy the plant to grow food, because it is food. So you're not just using your SNAP benefits to actually buy the product at its completion. So just engage, educate, and empower yourself to make the best decisions that you can for yourself. And so I don't buy organic. I'll look for naturally grown because one, the odds are is that they're grown locally, and they're using organic processes, but they just don't have that designation as being organically certified by the USDA. And then naturally grown has their own stamp of approval as well, correct, Marcus? With Maggie, what they do. So look at those differences: organic, naturally grown, and conventional.
So you touched on a question, that was one of the questions that someone had about organic. So, but to get back to that question, it seems like you touched on a lot. So do what you can at the local level, work with your elders, build the support for those structural changes. And then that's kind of where the work that I do in my organization comes in, that once we have that support, we can lift that up and we can make some of those structural changes. Because as long as your environment makes it difficult to get the things you need, then it's difficult. So, but like you said, don't wait on it, but then try to change it while you're waiting, while you're doing what you do.
We have to build up community, like,
Build up
community, here in the South and across the world, communities grow society, right? I'm where I am in my career because of the community that raised me and the community that instilled certain values in me. And so when we look at this from a food system perspective, I mean, if we take that back, just understanding our neighborhood and how and assisting one another and educating one another about how we make certain decisions about the types of food that we eat, or just generally about the structures that we purchase food from. And I'll bring it back to the process of the policy process of how elected officials get in office. Every vote does matter. Every purchase in the grocery store or the farmer's market matters as well. And so we have to make choices, and we make better choices when we're better educated to make those choices.
I love how you tied that all together. So a couple questions. This one is, why do you think it's been so difficult for the mainstream climate movement to address food systems? So a lot of times people don't think about how important the food system and the choices we make are to the environment, and how does the climate movement, how can it better incorporate food justice as a key tenet of climate justice?
Those folks who are involved in climate issues, they realize, and they're working actively to tie that in. Again, I would say get involved, read. There's a guy in East Texas that is harvesting fog, if you can believe that. He's actually harvesting fog for the residual water that comes from it, and is able to irrigate his crops from that. In Vietnam, they're using the closeness of bricks to actually grow food within the spaces between the bricks. It's a vertical farm. So because of the internet and our global connection globally, because if you look at the parallels that you're situated on, you can then best determine which products you can grow. And it doesn't matter where you're at on that parallel, you'll be able to grow similar crops. For instance, the folks in Oregon are on the same parallel with Paris. And so they're growing some of the better grapes in this country that will rival some of the grapes of the Champagne region of France. So knowing where you're at on this globe and looking at the similarities that you have with people globally will help you better understand your climate here in the US and how weather events play a role in those climate issues. And so just be aware of both climate and weather, and there's a difference. Weather is the events that happen periodically, and climate is the overall way in which our atmosphere works. So just knowing the difference, and I'll go back to the game. Engage, educate, and empower yourself with the knowledge to do that. No matter what you read, if it's a paragraph or 2 sentences, or if you're reading a book, become engaged, subscribe to professional organizations, or become a master gardener, or seek out the aid of your county extension agent, or just again, going back to the elders. I can't stress that enough on what you can learn just in a conversation.
Yeah.
So, and
Oh, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, looking at the linkages between climate change, environment, and agriculture, I just think that representation in the room matters. And so, as I've found, a lot of instances, most of the folks that are in the room related to environment and climate discussions don't necessarily have that agriculture and food system background to bring many of those topics to the conversation. So, like I said, I mentioned at Tulane that I teach environmental economics, and I teach us from a very, Louisiana provides a perfect example of how we can study environmental issues and climate change, given that the area between Baton Rouge and New Orleans is called Cancer Alley, with a number of oil, gas, and petrochemical factories that we have there. But also looking at the impacts of that, how they impact the seafood industry. The seafood industry is the largest, second or third largest industry for Louisiana, and then looking at the impacts on Louisiana agriculture. And so, there are multiple associated impacts that come from environmental issues and climate change, but we just have to have food system and agricultural representation at the table to be able to provide the education information to provide the linkages between that. So I think that's a part of that.
And what you're saying that, Dr. Coleman, I would challenge anyone to look at the boards and commissions in your community, to become a member of those boards and commissions. And oftentimes I'm the only Black female in the room. And just as people are empowered to question your credentials and question who you are, you also have the power to push back. Because I've been in the room where, especially now with it being a season of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because the money is there for diversity, equity, and inclusion, folks will ask me, well, do we really have to do this? And my answer is, well, no, you're going after whatever federal dollars that you're going after. I'm here because I was invited, but if you're not being invited to the table, make your own table. Start your own process of becoming knowledgeable in the field, and you become the expert in your community. Because if it's one thing that the game that I'm not going to play is being a Black woman in the room so that you can get your funding. If you want to see a Black woman leave and pick up their purse and walk out the room, that will be me. All right. So if you're not being invited to the table, and all the time you might not want to sit at somebody else's table because you don't know how they cook anyway. Make your own table. And then you can control the narrative of how the story is told and how it's read.
Yeah, and it brings, both of what you're saying brings into how important classes like this, where they're it's not just one type of student, it's nutrition students sitting down with environmental justice students, sitting down with public health, and that's how we make those connections. So that's so important. Marcus, you talked about too, both of you talked about representation and who's in the room and who's talking to whom.
So I think that's what you just mentioned, at least for me in the work that I do, is the importance of these interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary conversations where you have people from broad backgrounds, whether it's nutrition, whether it's environmental science, whether it's food science, whether it's agriculture, whether it's agribusiness. It takes all of those folks and all of these backgrounds coming together to really work through some of these issues, and particularly in the history related to agriculture. At least there were never, and still are in trainings, not many interdisciplinary based conversations about how we address many of these issues. And so, Angela brought up creating your own table, and creating your own table is key to understanding the broader impacts and how they relate to individuals and communities. So just this course alone and getting so many different people together is key.
I love it. Okay, so I'm going to ask if Dr. Margot or Lily, if you want to join or have any other questions. It is time to do our word cloud and kind of wrap up. So thank you so much, Marcus and Angela. Any questions that you want to raise before we end, Margot and Lily?
There's so many good questions
I know.
in the Q&A box, but we don't have time to get to all of them.
Yeah, I think I'll pass on adding my own questions, but I do have a few quick assignment or announcements for students, so I'll do those as people. Do we have the word cloud?
Yeah, let me pull that up. So first, quick announcement, join us next week, same place, same time. Priya Fielding-Singh will be with us, and she has a new book out called How the Other Half Eats, The Untold Story of Food and Inequality in America. So I think it's going to be a great conversation to piggyback on this week.